Emerging technologies both challenge and reward the financial services industry. With the advent of the Internet of Things, we've seen the development of new technologies, innovative applications, creative ways to solve problems, and the emergence of new opportunities that demand our attention. We've developed context-rich systems to respond to the new environment, adapting our use of analytics and intelligence. Innovations, such as virtual currency, may become some of the biggest disruptors in the history of IT. It's time to ask some big questions. How will this adaptive, smart approach affect the decision-making process? Our customers demand an always-on relationship. How do we meet their needs and provide continuous availability? How will we identify our customers? How will our customers identify us? Can we create an indisputable digital identity? How do we get ahead of ever more sophisticated cyber threats? Can we become more efficient by joining forces? How long can we hide inside the castle walls? It's time to find some big answers.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this panel on a guide to resilient and true 24/7 availability. My name is Brian Glick. I'm the editor-in-chief of Computer Weekly. For those of you who don't know us, Computer Weekly is one of Europe's leading business technology publications. I'm going to be your moderator for the session this morning. Now, we all, as I'm sure you know, live in a 24/7 world. Any of you who spent that 24/7 world last night in the casino next door or up in the Sky Bar may be regretting the fact that we live in a 24/7 world this morning. But nonetheless, I'm sure you all recognise that for financial institutions these days, your customers and partners, whether they are individuals or institutions, expect to be able to deal with you any time of day in any way that they choose to. Now, some of you may be, like me, old enough to remember the days when banks worked from 9 till 5 during the day. Where I am in the UK, I can still remember the time when banks closed at 3:30 in the afternoon, so staff had 2 hours at the end of the day to process all the checks. And that was then sent to a big old IBM mainframe to run some batch processing software to reconcile it all overnight. Of course, now, all your customers are on mobile phones, they're on the web, they're using smartwatches, they want to be on 24/7, and at the end of the day, it all gets plugged into a big old IBM mainframe and run a batch processing software to reconcile it all, in many cases, but nonetheless. So we're going to be talking over the next 45 minutes or so about some of the technology challenges that are inherent in that demand for 24/7. How do you ensure that you can run an organisation, run technology organisation that's able to support that? How have we got to the point we're in now? What does that mean for your technology strategy? What are the day-to-day operational challenges? And just how far is this going to go into the future? And presently, I'll introduce you to the panelists who are going to help you to understand some of those issues. First of all, though, we want to try and get a little feeling for just how 24/7 are your challenges. And we've got just one poll question for you. You've got your little devices, hopefully, on your tables, on your seats there. We want to know what proportion of your systems require 24/7 availability. You can see the answers there, 1, 2, 3, 4 in terms of roughly. Give us a little guess for that. If you could press your buttons now, select 1, 2, 3 or 4, then press the green button to send that through to us. And the results are. Look at that. A third of you have towards 100% of your systems fully available. 66, 2/3 of you have at least half of all your systems requiring 24/7 availability. Now that's a huge challenge for all of you, I'm sure. So let's have a discussion about how we're going to meet that. If I can invite the panel to come up and join me. Okay, I'll give you I'll give you a very quick introduction to each of our panellists, and as they answer the first question, I'll ask them to tell you a little bit more about them. We're going to talk for probably about half an hour or so around some of these issues, then we'll turn to you as the audience and give you an opportunity to put some questions to the panel as well. We've got a fantastic panel here. I really would urge you to take the opportunity to put some questions to them, and then once you've had a chance to put some questions, we'll just wrap up here on stage. So to introduce, first of all, immediately to my left is Mark Curran. Mark is Payments Technical Services Director, Global Payments at Lloyds Banking Group, an organisation in the UK I know well. Mark, welcome. Next to Mark is Bill Pappas. Bill wins the award for longest job title today. Bill is CIO of Global Wholesale Banking, Technology and Operations, Global Markets Operations and Middle East, GDC, Regional Tech and Ops for Bank of America Merrill Lynch. And that's the end of the panel. That's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. Next up is Torsten Pohl. Torsten is CIO of Core Component Technology for Global Transaction Banking at Deutsche Bank. Last but by no means least, welcome to Bhupen Warate. Bhupen is Global Head of Product Engineering, Banking Products at GTO for Standard Chartered. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much for coming, joining us today. Let's get on with the discussion. Okay, I said in the introduction, you know, we have come seemingly quickly to a world of 24/7 availability. And I just want to explore some of the business and customer drivers that have led us to this point. Bhupen, perhaps you can start and tell us a little bit about, introduce yourself and give us some perspective for your organisation as to how you've got to where you are today.
So I'm representing Standard Chartered Bank, once again Bhupen Warate, so I'm very happy to speak to you all today. Back to your question. What I see is we are all we're living in a globally connected world. Individuals and institutions are transacting their transaction on 24/7 basis. Banking is no more happening in brick and mortar branches. It is happening in massively flow-based digital world. Interestingly, what has happened is in the last 5 to 10 years, the definition of 24/7 is changed. And same is the applicability of 24/7. What is changed? So what is that which is changed? It is to do with resilience and high availability of application, and especially for digital services. So if your bank or any commercial institution is offering digital services, the whole definition and applicability of 24/7 is changed. I will pick up one example from Asia, and specifically from my home country in Singapore. About 2 years back, the Central Bank of Singapore, which is MAS, Monetary Authority of Singapore, has implemented faster payment. What it means that a client can transfer funds from his account into another account held at different bank. All this can be done instantaneously. The word here is instant. Now, when you run that kind of service, your whole paradigm, your whole 24/7 changes drastically. The reason for that is, in the past, when you are providing digital services, if your digital service is down, on your portal, you can write the services are down and customer will come after a few hours. But when you run something like fast in Singapore, you are part of that ecosystem where there are 16 other banks. So inward processing systems have to continuously run to receive payments, credit your client, and send back and confirmation. Essentially, in the last few years, what has changed is when you talk about digital systems, you talk about 24/7 availability. What you're looking for is perpetual resilience. What you're looking for is high availability with no planned downtime.
Okay. Torsten, Deutsche Bank, a European perspective perhaps on some of the drivers.
So my name is Torsten Pohl, German name, German accent, and not to confuse you, I am German. Just a short explanation, CIO for Core Component Technology. We have been splitting up our landscape into component products that ultimately serve client product solutions for our clients. And I'm looking after the core components, and we have also my peer looking after client components. So ultimately one of 2 CIOs for the Global Transaction Bank. Just looking at the poll results, I'm quite a bit surprised about the number that more than 30% of you believe that they have 75 to 100% of your systems are 24/7 available. 24/7 is not new to the industry, and a lot of client-facing applications will need to be available 24/7. And now with the introduction of G3 in Singapore or faster payments in the UK, your value chain, or the part of your value chain that needs to be available 24/7 is getting bigger and bigger. But I still believe we have lots of processes in major financial industries that are not yet 24/7 available, but need to be in the future. And I want to maybe look into our future clients. So I think it's now called Generation Z, that follows Generation X and Y. When I grew up in the 80s and had my first piece of technology, that was a ZX81. I don't know anybody remember that. And what you, a few hands, besides it gaining interest for technology, it taught me one thing, and that was patience. And people, some of you are smiling because you use it potentially yourself. The future generation is not patient at all. Any technology they have now gives them information instantaneously. And these future clients of us will demand everything on the press of a button, not just faster payments or anything like that. So the trend will continue and will increase for more 24/7 availability.
ZX81, fine British technology. I'm glad of a mention of that. Bill Pappas, an American perspective.
American perspective, couple of things. Let's start with saying that we're actually moving at the speed of the consumer versus the speed of the enterprise. So when you look at 24/7, our clients and customers really require us to be able to have fast, reliable, and 24/7 service capabilities that, especially as you look at all the connectivity that they have with the digital opportunities that we have out there. So from that perspective, not only they want that, but they only want to make sure that we provide them all of these, but secure, reliable, and protect the data. When I look at it from the way we look at it at Bank of America, there is three things that we need to do to be able to respond to that. Simplifying the complex, ensuring that we are able to resolve everything and anything, and we need to make sure that we have the right talent to be able to truly meet the demand. From simplifying the complex, a lot of work that we have done to be able to do that was around simplifying the infrastructure, really reduce the legacy dependency that you have in a lot of the platforms, but also create an infrastructure that is agile enough to be able to bring new products to the market as the evolution of those are coming pretty fast. We talked about being prepared for everything and anything. When you look at how fast everything is happening, your ability to be able to protect and withstand all of current and future threat is where we're spending tremendous amount of time as the CIOs, and making sure that you have a very integrated and multifaceted information security strategy is very important. And then the talent is a big thing for us as everything moving so fast, and the demand of the customer having the right people that have the right combination between cutting-edge technology, subject matter expertise, product, and also being able to understand the customer behavior is huge.
Last but by no means least, from the centre of the world in Britain, Mark.
The disadvantage going last is everybody else nicks your stuff. But I think I reflect on what everyone said. We built faster payments in the UK about 8 years ago, and I sit on the board of the faster payments scheme. And I think every day in the UK we become more surprised at how customers use banks. And I think that is what is truly driving kind of 24/7, 365 requirements. I think as banks, as technology companies, and I have to say, I'm not a technologist. I just get to referee the technologists back at the ranch. But I think kind of the focus on making sure that technology is available for our customers 24 hours a day, every day of the week, is a cultural thing. I agree with you entirely. It's about people and processes as much as it is around tin and cabling. And I think sometimes we miss that. And I think kind of, but just recognizing our customers use us every day, they rely on us every day. It's not even a use case thing. It's kind of what we do enables people to live their lives. It enables people to buy bread for their children, and kind of it's pretty fundamental that's there at the point of use when you want to use it.
Well, let's explore some of those issues of people and process as well. Seeing as you had to go last this time, Mark, let's come to you first on this one. you and your panelists have eloquently described how the world has changed for you in recent years. But what does that mean when it comes to trying to manage and set a technology strategy and make decisions around the technology that you need to support those changing drivers?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question. I kind of usually focus on three areas. The Rugby World Cup. Hand up if you're a rugby person. Nobody puts their hands up, and this will be a short story. The Rugby World Cup. There's a saying in rugby. We have this saying. It's called white line fever, and it's kind of when the forwards, the big guys, get near the posts and they just see the white line, and all they do is try and push the ball over the white line, and all the kind of fancy players out in the back line are saying, "Can you send the ball out here?" No, white line, white line. And I think the first thing we often do, and strategically we have to get away from doing, is we have what I call big box fever. So we focus our 24/7 resilience on the big bits of kit, the big infrastructure, and the big applications. And that's a good place to start, but it's certainly not a good place to end, because you then got to get into all the underlying technologies. And if you think about from a customer's perspective, as you set your strategy, what is the risk appetite for our customers? Where the risk, I think the point you made, is nobody wants the system to be unavailable ever. That kind of sets the trend line, it sets the bar. So you kind of need to focus on the big boxes, you need to focus on all of the processes that join them together. But where you usually find the issues are, and certainly as we've worked through this at Lloyd's, it's not the big boxes and the non-stop technology that stops. It's kind of that process of uploading the sort code directory, or kind of somewhere where humans become involved. So the kind of the second phase gets into automation and trying to take kind of the human element out of that. And the third one, and I absolutely agree, is about people. It's about people who get that this is a 24/7 environment and get the importance of it being a 24/7 environment. If you can get those three things in your strategy, then you're well on the road. It's not the end, but it's certainly a good place to start.
Mm-hmm. Anybody who has been watching the Rugby World Cup will understand why a Scot will want to mention it when sitting next to an Englishman.
Doesn't happen very often, but hey.
Bill, how about you? Same question to you. How has this affected your technology strategy?
Yeah. I mean, we're looking at three different ways. The first one goes back to what I said at the beginning. A lot of Bank of America, and I think a lot of the institutions that we're all part of this, they grew through acquisitions. We have a couple of everything. So if I look at the infrastructure, their ability to be able to really simplify the infrastructure is key. Lessen the dependency on a lot of the legacy platforms that we have. It's really help us to make sure that you create a more agile infrastructure that is able to really not only provide the 24/7, but being able to go to market faster with the new products and easier to be able to reduce operational risk and being able to reduce costs and increase clients. So infrastructure and the simplification, it's a big piece for us. The second thing that I look at it is making sure that you build the infrastructure with resilient in mind. So design it by resilient versus after the fact. And not only design it by resilience, but really make sure that you take this through the whole end-to-end process, inclusive of the operations that you need to support that. And the third thing I will say that you need to make sure that we build monitoring into the end-to-end process, having enough monitoring to make sure that you understand what's happening across both the techs and the operations, and proactively being able to mitigate risk when and if you're not able to provide that very vital 24/7. But also have an infrastructure to also allow for an exception process if you're required to have that.
Torsten, same question to you.
Pretty much building up, or because my peers have just been taken away my answer to it, building up on what they've been saying. So one element on the reduced manual intervention, and the second end-to-end business monitoring. I would absolutely agree. We need to move away from monitoring individual processes or infrastructure or specific applications to the end-to-end business flow, because our clients don't care whether one part of the value chain has been broken, because it needs to work end-to-end. And then the next step is, and we are working on this in Deutsche Bank massively at the moment, is then not just have the monitoring that tells you that there might be a problem coming, but automatically fixing it. So a simple example, and it won't work in all cases, but if you're somewhere running out of disk space, you don't want to raise an alert and you're dependent on somebody manually seeing the alert and then adding it to it. You can automate lots of these processes to come to, hopefully, an environment where you need hardly any manual intervention to provide 24/7 resiliency.
And Bhupan, you've heard some great ideas from these guys. Anything you can add in terms of strategic technology?
Just I'm going to pick up a few words from Mark and Bill. Mark talked about big boxes and Bill talked about agility. So in Standard Chartered Bank, we have a lot of legacy, like in the bank, which Mark talked about big boxes. So we are looking into how do we really get these big boxes broken into components, move towards service-oriented architecture to get the agility. And that's extremely important because to achieve 24/7, you need to have perpetual resilience. And again, I'm reusing that word. Primarily, when you have everything in monolithic box, you just don't want to change it. And that's where you have to break the whole components. So that's something very important for us, and we are driving towards open architecture.
Now, you all stressed in your answers there, one way or another, the importance of the people and process side of this. It is perfectly common in a group of technologists for people to get dragged down by the discussion about the technology, but the actual day-to-day demands of preventing downtime often come down to more holistic things, really. When you're really getting down into the key elements of preventing downtime, what are the things that you focus on the most? Bill, perhaps you could lead us off on this one.
And before I go there, I think when you look at it, it's the most important thing for us as you look at 24/7, it's ensure that you have the right balance between creating an infrastructure that is so rigid with also being agile enough and allow you to go to the market fast to be able to differentiate yourself. And I think as a lot of us, we've been working on it, if we're kind of able to find the right balance, not only it's key to be able to do that, but it's going to really help us differentiate in the marketplace. When I look at what are the steps, we have 5 steps that we really go through within Bank of America. The first one is, I think I mentioned it before, is how do you design with resilience in mind? We spent a lot of time, if you look at the last 10 years, being able to, after the facts, trying to embed resilience, and everybody knows that's not only expensive, it's not actually bulletproof. So changing the way we develop and make sure that you have the right component from a resilient perspective is very important for us. The second thing that is very important for us is ensuring that we increase the monitoring and really making sure that you put monitoring as part of the end-to-end process and make sure it goes back to not only from a tech perspective, but really end-to-end and ensure that you understand the impact on the operation processes and how we need to react to that. At the Bank of America, we are very proactively monitoring a lot of the critical, obviously, infrastructure that we have, and we take the health of this on an ongoing basis, ranging from being able to look at your software and your infrastructure from a basic perspective, but also making sure that you understand the whole entire flow. So taking the pulse is very important for us. The third thing is making sure that when you look at your infrastructure, how do you keep it evergreen and how do you always run hot? I mean, that's another component that has a cost, the infrastructure cost associated with that, but that's very important for us for the critical processes. And also when you look at the infrastructure, making sure that those evergreen components, they're not commingled. So when and if you need to be able to quickly isolate them to remediate the risk, it's very important for us to do that. The fourth thing that is very, very important is ensuring that you embed in what we call QA and QC. So making sure that you have both quality assurance and quality control in all of the phases of building your strategy, developing and making sure that you're testing it to ensure that every change that you put into the process, it's very well thought of. And the last thing I go back and it's the whole process, people, and risk culture. Things will happen. I mean, obviously, we can put a lot of money, but we're trying to balance the agility versus the robustness of the infrastructure to provide 24/7. You need to have the right people, the right training, the right risk culture. So when things happen, we will be able to proactively, as much as you can, mitigate the client experience. So that the culture and that component around risk is very, very important, which complements everything else that we're thinking through as you're building that resilient infrastructure that is much needed.
Torsten, in your previous answer, you alluded to some of the process elements that you go through. You talked about managing exceptions and setting up alerts and notifications and so forth, which are clearly a key part of this. But how about for yourself? You know, what are the key elements of preventing downtime for you, especially around the people side as well?
Bill has been covering lots of ground there already. So I think the dilemma that we have that still in the industry, the majority of incidents are caused by change, as a matter of fact. But we get in an ever so agile environment that more and more changes are needed. So I think one of the solutions for that is more and more automation. More and more automation coverage. So starting from development and having lots of unit test coverage, using the right tools, regression testing, performance testing automated to take a bit the human element out of the equation. And also when it comes to deployments, automated deployments versus manual, because it not only reduces the downtime, but also the risk of, even though that the software has been probably tested and everything is fine, the last step in the chain is not done properly because of a human error. So that's, in addition to what Bill has said, I think would be my answer to your question.
Bhupan, your thoughts on this particular?
Yeah, so there are a lot of stories to share in this space on how do we manage 24/7 on day-to-day basis, but I will share a recent story which Standard Chartered has recently implemented, something known as Central Command Center. So we have set up an office in Kuala Lumpur, which is our central shared service center. Which is, the office is 5 times bigger than this room. That command center has huge screens and various experts from different parts of the banks. They work together 24/7, 365 days. So we have people who understand firewall, we have people who understand servers, mid-range, we have people who understand middleware, and operations staff. They keep monitoring various activities, servers, processes. Any build up into the volume is immediately looked into. It's very similar to NASA style setup where information is fed in from transaction processing systems, various other information coming in from the infrastructure side. And people who are expert, they look into it and fix it then and there. So the 2 keywords which can encapsulate this story is monitoring and fast recovery. And to make this happen, we brought in everybody in a single huge room.
Okay. Mark, somehow we've ended up with you being last answering a question again. That's for the Rugby World Cup jibe. That's what
that's fine.
People and process from your perspective.
I honestly believe that resilience is a cultural thing. And it has to be a cultural thing in the organisation, because to build on the points, and they're all great points, the technologies we utilise, generally, if you don't wiggle the wires, they're generally pretty stable. Therefore, that cultural piece of every colleague in the organisation understanding why we're here, and that's to serve customers, has got to go across the entire challenge. And you get that priority challenge becomes key. So the priorities for our change leads are to get their change in on time and on budget. The priorities for our service delivery people are to offer great service. Well, actually, no, the priority for all of us is to deliver for the customer. And you need someone, the referee, if you like, for the big weekends when and let's face it, regulatory change is big on all of our agendas, where we've got 20, 30, 40 changes going in, even just to our payments estate. It's okay to kill some of those because it's just not the right thing to do. But that culture thing has to extend beyond the boundaries of your organisation. It has to extend into your vendors and your partners, because if you've not got that whole focus across the piece, then that culture has a block in it somewhere, and it will come down. But I absolutely believe, first and foremost, sort the culture, the technology will follow if everybody's on that same track and following that same strategy.
Okay. I'm keen to take some questions from the audience in a moment. So I'll give you one more question, gentlemen, before I do so. So if we can try and keep the answers to this one fairly concise, so we've got time for the audience. Let's look to the future a little bit. While you're all facing the challenges that you've been describing about evolving your infrastructures and managing risk and so forth, elsewhere we've seen the emergence of web-scale businesses like Google and Facebook and Amazon, for who have built for 24/7 resilience from day one, who have introduced new techniques in disaster recovery and business continuity and availability that organisations such as yours with big legacy infrastructures find it very difficult to replicate. What can the financial services industry and your organisations learn from some of those organisations and what's going on in other industries, and where do you think this challenge is going to go over the next few years, over the next 5 years or so? Torsten, perhaps yourself first.
Just look maybe at Google as an example in how they manage their data centers. So Google has hundreds of data centers across the globe, and some are the size of 2 football fields. And they have a technology or an approach that's called modular data centers, where they add capacity at the size of shipping containers full of hardware that they can add to it. Now, I'm not saying that everybody now should be building data centers the size of 2 football fields or the minimum unit of hardware you think is a shipping container full. But what they have been doing very successfully is building a very flexible infrastructure. So part of resiliency is managing capacity appropriately and ensuring that you can add on to that. So the solution is, and I don't want to use cloud as a term because it has been overly overused and overhyped, but move away from dedicated applications designed to physical hardware, but more into a virtualized space, and then have what I would like to call an elastic infrastructure that allows you to scale, because that's a very important part of 24/7 availability. The second point is when you look at resiliency in Google, is the classical resiliency in lots of industries is you have a primary and you have a secondary. If you have a problem on your primary from a hardware perspective, you fall to your secondary side. Google has lots of ways to do that differently. So, for example, they would be having 5 or 6 sites available to them, and they would reroute their traffic in a round-robin way. That is not only great for load distribution, but really takes the element of hardware failures out, because you can, even if 3 or 4 of your sites are not available, the others can still handle the load. That doesn't work always for banking based on the processes that you have, but I would just encourage to move away from the classical concept, and also move away from the classical concept how we manage disaster recovery. A new thing that we do now is, historically, you run on your primary, you do a disaster recovery test, you check out on the weekends, your secondary side works, and then you fall back to your primary side. That has shown us that not always you're ready on your secondary side, because you never tested end to end with hundreds of interfaces on the other side whether this would be working. So what we do now in areas, and we increase that ever more, is flip-flops. When we do a failover to disaster recovery, we stay on that side. So we don't have a primary and a secondary, we have an A and a B. That shows you really that in case of a real problem, you can fail over, and you have been proving end to end that works.
Bhupen, briefly, a little look on the future.
Yeah, just want to add one thing to what we just talked about, and that is in relation to the multiple level of resilience. The classic resilience is pretty much based on swapping the database or moving from one side to another. But what is really important, and that's where we can learn from likes of Google's and Facebook, their resiliency comes into the application code. You have to design your application to have resiliency. You can't expect that the clustering of servers or clustering of application servers will give you enough resiliency. You have to write your code where you have to see how this business process can be routed to different places. And it's not only about technology. There are people behind it who are supporting this technology, especially repair of messages or those kind of things. So you need to get the whole picture in mind and design the application at all 3 levels, the hardware, middleware, and the application business process level, to make it really complete.
Mark and Bill, briefly, your additions on the future?
A couple of things. I mean, when I look at this, there's things that we're learning that we need to do to catch up with them. You mentioned it. I mean, they started from scratch. We inherited. So nobody likes to admit, but we need to invest heavily on really eliminating the variance that we have in the dependency on the legacy infrastructure, because that and only that is huge. And we are doing it for the last 5 years, and significant investment and ability and that you need to put into that. The second thing that is interesting, we are very heavily regulatory environment, and they're not. So when you look at some of the stuff, we talked about cloud, things that we can do and things that we cannot do, at least from a Bank of America perspective, we have an opportunity, given the size and the scale, to take a lot of the benefits of the cloud, but private versus public. So you need to keep that in mind. And then you talked about the ability to be able to virtualize. I mean, go back, and the more that you're able to do that, the more it's going to help you. But I'll go back with the fundamentally, the size and the scale of what we run, start the simplification first, then add on that your ability to standardize, use the cloud and those benefits, and then being able to look at the way they manage data. I think one of the things that is very impressive that we can learn given the institutions that we manage is the way that they analyze the data sets and what can we learn from that. Because as we're cleaning a lot of the infrastructure, we can unleash tremendous amount of opportunities based on that for us.
Okay. Mark?
I mean, again, thanks for making me last again. But I think just building out on all of those points, I think the other thing we can learn from them, because there's no question, kind of that distributed technology answer, that kind of always on, be so careful. But they're also very good at having somewhere to go when all of that goes wrong. And I think that's got to be part of the resilience strategy as well, is kind of figure out how good you are at recovering. There's no point in spending all your time and effort in kind of focusing on making sure the boxes don't fall over, because one of them will at some stage. But how good are you at the recovery? And kind of, do you test it? Do you kind of stress it? And do you have a structure that underpins it? Do people know what to do when normal kind of day-to-day operations have ceased and you're into extremis? Do people know where they're meant to be and what they're meant to be doing? So I think the Google case studies and all those kind of new-to-market technologists have got that in spades as well.
Indeed. Thank you, gents. Let's turn to the audience. A couple of, I'll cover the house lights up just so we can see any hands that are going up. There's a hand right at the front here, I think I saw go up first.
So Rob Kotlatz at Bottom Line Technologies. Mark, you mentioned this issue of the vendor community. So many of the banks are now very highly dependent on packaged software from different vendors, people like ourselves, and many others in the market. Do you feel, does the panel feel the vendor community is responding well to the challenges you're facing? What are you seeing them doing to assist you in the 24/7 world? And do you think that model with essentially partnering with the vendor community will be the way forward to drive and drive out the right type of systems for this modern world? Your comments.
Mark?
I love it when people ask the question and answer it, which is, you should be up here. I think you're absolutely right. I think the vendor community, and we do use kind of off-the-shelf packages more and more, and I think that's part of the resilience piece is stop customizing off-the-shelf packages that were actually built to do the thing you bought them for. I think the vendor community can always do more, because at the end of the day, it's a competitive market out there, and I think one of the biggest challenges is picking your vendors carefully. And actually, come back to my cultural piece, one of our selection criteria is exactly that, is kind of what is their resilience strategy, how does that work? And also, and the big challenge, there are very few vendor solutions out there who do the whole thing end to end. I think, Orsten's point, just kind of, we test end to end, but we don't actually buy an end to end solution. Pick the vendors that can work well together, because the last thing you want when you do get into an extremist situation is 2 or 3 vendors pointing at each other and saying, "Oh, it's not my box. It must be his." But I think the community is getting resilience. It can do more. It should do more, and I encourage the vendor community to make that one of their key priorities as well.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I think first of all the realization that call them vendors or strategic partners, they're part of the end-to-end process that we manage. And given the regulatory environment that we're responsible for the whole end-to-end. So that completely changed the mind frame, the mindset in terms of how do we actually starting that dialogue. What we're seeing, given the size and the scale of what we have, we are pushing our strategic partners and our vendors to really think very differently from the way they have done before. Think differently in terms of what is core versus what customized. And for us, for example, we just developed a credit platform that we put everything in it from large corporate financial institution and commercial clients that was never there. So we work with the vendors to be able to develop something and really push them aggressively in terms of what their new target should look like. And the other thing that is very important with them is the way that you work with your strategic partners and the transparency that you require. Even if it's you buying it off the shelf, the transparency in terms of how they're developing, how they're deploying it, and your ability to be able to understand that throughout the process is very important. So that strategic partner integration is huge, but also pushing them to really change the mindset and architecting them in such a way that you're not going to end up with an island of solutions, but an end-to-end process that then you'll be able to have the infrastructure to be able to manage the resilience. But we are definitely doing a lot more buying versus building, where a lot of the things that we're doing is commodity, but the mindset and the ability to come up really fast is going to differentiate them on how they're going to do business with us.
Okay. All the hands are going up in my eye line over there. So I'll take there was a hand over there, I think, went up first. Again.
Thank you. Wittkander, Spectrum Systems. What about the elephant in the room, the legacy applications? You mentioned that you want to decrease the size of the zoo, right? And you want to virtualize your apps. You cannot do it with Unisys, Algol, COBOL, or IBM COBOL applications. What's your plan?
Thoughts on Bhupan? You didn't answer the last one.
Sorry, I didn't get your question. Can you repeat?
What do you do with legacy applications? Unisys mainframe, IBM mainframe.
Yeah.
You can't virtualize them as they are, and they're difficult to integrate with the rest of the world.
Yeah. So absolutely, this is something I touch base on. All banks have massive legacy applications, and some of them are as old as like 50 years, 40-year-old applications running still on ISM file and COBOL code. I think the solution lies in integrating it with Java wrappers on top of it, making it, converting it to service-oriented architecture, and gradually breaking it into various components, taking out pieces, modules out of those applications and moving into smaller components. And that is extremely important, very fundamental to become agile, because some of this legacy code and some of this legacy application really gives us massive stability, which is conversely proportionate to the agility which we want in today's world. So I think you need to draw up a program to define the objectives for the institution and move towards that.
I love your answer because we supply the technology for that.
Thank you.
But I'll be a little more controversial on that. I actually think, given we just talked about the 24/7, your ability to modernize and simplify your infrastructure is, for me at least, key to everything. So yes, we're getting a lot of stability for a lot of the legacy infrastructure. I mean, there is no question about it. But having a very thoughtful plan in terms of how you're going to build the new infrastructure that fit for purpose, it is more important than any new digital capability that is coming into that. And where we need to do, as the institution that we run, this is it's a multi-year and a multi-million investment that you don't see often across. But I don't think we can truly get to the 24/7 with the expectations that the clients have for us if you are still maintain that type of a legacy infrastructure. And that's going to be our challenge, because we're going to take the investment away for new capabilities in order to be able to do that.
Thanks for those questions. We're very close to the end of our time now, and I do want to just give our panellists a chance for one sort of concluding statement. If anybody else has questions they didn't get a chance to answer, then I'm sure, please, at the end, you'll get an opportunity to try and grab our panellists as we finish and put the questions to them directly. But thanks to those of you who did ask. So just as a summary then, if I could just ask each of you to pull out one thing, one piece of advice, one top tip, however you might like to describe it, that you would like to share with the audience to summarise how to meet some of these challenges. And Mark, I'll absolutely let you go first on this one.
Thank you. And I'm watching the rugby at the weekend, I'll think about you. I think that the two biggest tips, I'm going to cheat and take two, but let me go first. So the two biggest tips. One, remember why we're doing this. We're doing this because our customers and our clients demand it. And I think sometimes that gets lost. That's why we're here. That's why we're focusing on being resilient. It's because it's what our clients and our customers demand. And the second one is absolutely make it a cultural thing. Make it part of the DNA of your organisation. And think about whether you need a chief resilience officer, because sometimes somebody who's got responsibility for that job will bring some focus to it. But don't just put them in and hope it'll all be good. Make it a core part of the DNA of your organisation.
Okay. Bill, your one piece of advice?
I will say three things. Simplify the complex, be prepared for everything and anything, and make sure that you have the right talent to help you differentiate in the marketplace.
Thank you. Torsten?
It's not about infrastructure or applications or process and people. It's all of the four need to be looked at holistically. Because if you miss one area of it, then you're going to fall short.
Okay. And finally, Bhupen.
Yeah, most often when you develop digital services, the product managers and the commercial guys, they look into only the features, and they most of the time overlook the real need of perpetual resilience. So what is really important for you all and for your institution to bring that piece at the forefront as well. It is, if it is not more important, it is equally important for a successful company.
Thank you, gentlemen. This is a subject we could talk about all day, if you get it. But sadly, we have to draw to an end there. I hope you found something useful to take away in our discussion about 24/7 availability and true resilience within your organisations. A big thank you from me to panellists, to Mark Curran from Lloyds Banking Group, Bill Pappas from Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Torsten Pohl from Deutsche Bank, and Bhupen Warate from Standard Chartered Banks. Thank you for being a great audience. If you can show your appreciation to the panellists.